Hello all and welcome. It is time for a tier list video. And in this video, we will be reviewing both a PVE and PvP tier list written by Rayon. And for that, I'm going to head over to nearrayon.guide, which is a site put together by some community members over at the unofficial Discord. All right. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is damage dealers. And here they're rated from triple S down to A. And I want to talk about how these costumes are evaluated so that hopefully in the future you know how to place any new costumes that come out. Furthermore, we're going to have to add some more recent costumes that have been added to the pool, as this tier list is just a little bit out of date. But that's okay. That'll help us understand, again, how we're evaluating these costumes. Okay, so let's get right into it. I want to start by talking about A2, who was released at the beginning of the game, and for us in Global, we also got 2P. And they're heading up the double S category. Both come with an attack passive and a crit rate passive. And, 4 hits for A2 on the character skill, 5 for 2P. And A2 ended up being the stronger one because she's a greatsword user, and greatswords have higher stats. And yeah, you can run them, with an off-type weapon, but there are a lot of cases, like in Tower, where you're supposed to use a two-hand sword user. Who are you going to grab, kind of thing. Okay, so in any case, if we start here and understand that, 2 damage passives, crit rate, of course, is very important. We can kind of understand how to evaluate these characters and how the power creep has changed throughout this year plus of the game being out for us. And the things you want to look at are, of course, the base stats, the base attack. And, when the game started, we were looking at 5,000s, 6,000s, and now that's more like 7 and 8,000s pre-awakening. And then from there, we'll talk about, the different types of passives and damage modifiers. Okay, so this is great for just kind of generic damage, right? You can slap any element on them and count on them to do a lot of damage. They had impressive base attack for the time, a decent amount of hits on the character skill, etc. So if we understand that, the, attack plus crit rate, then we can understand the direct upgrades in that same category, which was back in June, we got Summer 063Y, who is just a direct upgrade to A2. Okay, so that 20% crit rate and attack went up to 25, and then, higher base stats. He can also specialize in fire, but he's great as just a generic damage dealer. 2-hand sword user. He's always my go-to whenever I need a 2-hand sword user. Damage dealer. And then Queen, who just came out in September, she is the same type as well, with those 25s. And she's a fist user, so gives you some more flexibility. Cool. All right, so then, attack and crit rate, those are just fine and all. But the other damage modifiers can potentially make someone stronger. And I'm talking about Bold Vigor, Caged Vigor, and Pursuit for the most part. You can put Element Boon in that category because these are all damage modifiers that get added at the end of the damage calculation chain, which is a big deal. And unfortunately, element passives usually come in Rush and Leap type passives, which only affect a weapon stat, and it only affects a small piece of your bottom line, rather than like a fixed element boon, which nobody really has. However, the new ones are pretty good with 100%. Of course, like Marie has that, and Yuri has that, some others. But next I want to talk about Bold Vigor attackers, and that's where we have our top 2 here. And both of these girls, along with Joker, are one-hand sword users that have a defense break on the character skill, which is cool because you're packing utility in there too. Joker's not a Bold Vigor attacker, so we'll talk about him in a second. But For that reason, usually their character skill is used to start the damage off, and then basically you're going to see crazy numbers from their weapon skills. Again, you have to keep their HP full, pretty much. Okay, more Bold Vigor attackers include Celeb Saryu, who's kind of a light specialist. And then down here, we have Fractured Griff, Bloody Demos, and 2P has a Bold Vigor modifier on the character skill, but no passive. But this passive, you know, Gale's been out for a while, and ever since we got slabs, her value just went through the roof with that Bold Vigor. And again, like, her character skill might not do that much damage, but it will apply the defense break, and then again, you'll see just crazy damage from the skills if you can meet that requirement of having high HP. Then Marie came out in August with our 1.5 anniversary. And same deal, a 4-hit character skill with a defense break, but hers has a better multiplier on it, higher percentage multiplier. And she also has like a liquid drive, so if you're using water, but she's great in every element anyway. And the drawback here is you really need that third awakening to get the third passive to bring her base attack up to what it was advertised. But she's still super strong even without it. So that's kind of why they're at the top. That Bold Vigor is very effective. So while we're on that subject, we can talk about Caged Vigor, which relies on low HP. And the most famous example, of course, being EX063Y. And you have to get him really low. It's kind of a pain. But sometimes you can position him to take that burn skill from the Moose in Subjugation, take his HP all the way down to 1, do your damage in the knockdown, and then maybe queue up a healing companion so that he survives, unless you just want to reset a ton. And you can just bring him in anywhere if you feel like resetting until he's the one that gets hit. It's all random. It's really annoying. But you're not going to see very good numbers from him throughout the battle until those conditions are met. But he does have a 5-hit. And might I add, the animation looks really cool. Okay, additional Caged Vigor attackers include Abstract Lavanya and Guardian Lars. And this is kind of cool because we have a 3-star Lars here, and if you haven't farmed out EX Lars yet, he can do just as much damage if you meet those conditions again, of course. But you see where they are compared to all of these attackers. You know, if you have better attackers, then you'll use them instead of them, right? But it's pretty interesting that they work. I never thought about using Abstract Lavanya myself. Now, we did get Crow, and Crow needs to be added here. I consulted Rayan, and Rayan said we can go ahead and add Crow in the top 5 here. And Crow is actually another Bold Vigor attacker, but he's kind of a hybrid. He's got party crit rate. And while I'm mentioning that, let's head over and talk about Noelle, who is kind of similar to the generic build. And she has a 5-hit, which is really nice, and it gives us a strong DPS spear user. She also has that party crit. And that's all that you can really say about her. Basically, you know, good in any element, 5-hit character skill, lots of damage, really good base attack. Okay, so Joker can play a similar role to Marie and Gale, but his passive is Pursuit, which means anytime he's chaining 3 or more, he gets that awesome damage modifier. So in Subjugation, let's say you're running an off-type weapon. If you have Bold Vigor, then you're still going to be doing tons of damage on those single hits because you can't combo on an off-type. Whereas Joker wouldn't be able to. Okay, so, but, you know, you don't need to play with his HP, you know, throughout the battle. However, his character skill does benefit from Caged Vigor. So we can add him to the Caged Vigor category just because it's on the character skill. But again, not a passive. But he's another defense breaker, so he's kind of combining utility. In DPS, he's got great base stats. He's got good HP. He's just a great all-rounder. And along with Queen, they don't need a lot of, or any really awakenings to be strong, and their base attack is really impressive without it. Okay, the next type I want to talk about are two characters that, there are more than the two, but the two that are up here, which is Griff and Frozen Heart Theo, get a modifier on combo length. So if you put their character skill at the end of a long combo, you'll see crazy numbers fly off. And Griff has been our favorite for a while, one of our favorites for a while because of that. He's great in Tower and other challenge quests, high difficulty content. Because in that type of content, you're always launching big combos between the boss actions anyway. And, you know, you can just slap Griff in there and he's got a nice 5 hits. And if you meet those conditions, you got enough buffs stacked on him, you will very often see him cap with those 5 hits. And, you know, that'll really turn the tide in battle in your favor. So then Frozen Heart Theo came out, and hers is only a 4 hits, but still pretty good. So far, the Frozen Heart characters are built with really nice base attack, which hers is way better than Griff's, by the way. And then they're just kind of tanky in their passives. So she doesn't have damage passives. But that character skill has the combo gimmick. For that same reason, you know, Griff's base stats aren't that impressive, so you're not going to see big numbers from him throughout the battle until you launch that huge combo, which the combo makes it worth it. All right, cool. So that covers everyone in the top here except for Lars and Yuri, who I'll put in another category, even though the condition is slightly different for them. All right. So Lars, he's been farmable since start, and he relies on crit damage. And so as long as you have a really nice crit rate on him, he has a timed crit damage passive. So you'll see great numbers all throughout the battle from him for those first 60 seconds at least. And then his character skill has an insane multiplier. And, you know, as long as you're critting, you will see him cap very easily. Only drawback is it's only 3 hits, and that's the same deal with his Guardian, only 3 hits. So if you've already farmed EX Lars, you probably don't want to mess with Guardian because it's easier to crit than, you know, doing the HP gimmick. Okay, then Yuri just came out, and she's just so busted, super strong. She does have that fire passive, but it doesn't matter. She'll hit hard with any element, and she has been compared to Lars because she's got that super high modifier on the character skill. It's a 5 hit. It's a C gauge, which is another thing to look out for. It means it charges way faster. And her only gimmick is you need an attack buff on her for that character skill to get the full modifier. And she's my personal favorite because I really like utilizing the character skill to do my damage. Again, Marie and Gale. Marie's is better, but it's, you know, in each case, it's only a 4 hit, and it's more about the utility of the defense break, and then their skills doing damage, where Yuri is going to do damage all the time, and then her character skill is going to cap very easily with 5 hits. So Yuri's my personal favorite for that reason. Great, so that'll wrap up the discussion on damage dealers. And I did mention Crow, right? So he's Bold Vigor, hybrid, and he has a 3 hits. And then let me just scroll through the new costumes real quick. Make sure I'm not missing anyone. Okay, so Abstract Yuri, as far as damage, she's kind of like element specialist, light, but a little more of an element support, light support, because she has a light crush. We're going to talk about this later. And then crit rates, and then if you get that passive Bold Vigor. So I like her better in Arena. And then we have some Abyssals who we will also talk about. And I think that's all. Okay, just making sure I've covered my bases there. Great, let's move on to the next category of damage buff. So along with damage dealers, the damage buffers, defense breakers, and element buffers are just as important. Okay, we generically call these costumes supporters, right? And while the damage dealers were rated from A to triple S. These will be in their own category, rated from left to right. Right? And the best being Christmas Akeha, of course. She's got the best pursuit buff, an attack buff to party, and an attack passive to party, and an HP passive to party. And the way these supports will be rated is kind of like how good their support is, and then what else they have going on. So you see she has 4 things going on there. Okay, so next on this list, I don't use her much personally as a damage supporter, but she's a generic attack buffer, but she has a crit damage passive, which is very strong. Okay, then Abstract Rion, really high up here. He has a pursuit buff to the party, and so does Bloody Argo. Then Celeb Akeha, who's really, PvP goddess, can be used here too, because she has an attack buff to party and then a defense break to the enemy. And then as we go down the list, they either, it gets less interesting with their buff, or they have less support passives. For example, Abstract Gale doesn't have any support passives to the party, but she can bring in an attack buff. Okay. Attack buff or defense break. It's one of the two. I haven't used her in a while, so I apologize. She's a launch character. I'm pretty sure it's an attack buff. And, Noelle has the attack buff. The Summer F66X, you probably already know about her. She's got a very unique gimmick of blocking the enemy from being able to cast any kind of special state like Provoke, Regen, Element Boon, Pursuit, all of these things. So she can be useful in PVE. For example, in the Frozen Heart quests, she can block that really annoying evade skill, that evade buff that the either Fio or now we have Rion, they cast on themselves. If you can see that queuing up in the boss's actions and you use her character skill before it, it'll block it and you won't have to wait that out. So pretty cool. She can also block the fish's regen, but it's not the best strat against the fish. You really just want to do a damage race against the fish. And I have a whole video on that. Check the channel for that. Okay, so at the end here, we have like crit rate buffers and that kind of thing. So we're not going to talk about every one. But of course, I will leave a link to this in the description so you can kind of poke through this site and learn more. Let's move on to defense breakers, and we kind of already talked about Gale and Marie. And you see from left to right, it's, they're rated on how good they are as a defense breaker. So Gale has the highest with 50%, Marie next with 45%, and then most of these are going to be 30s. And defense break is very valuable. Again, it's something that gets added at the end of the chain of damage calculation. Right? Element buffers are super strong. And we have 2 types of element buffing. One where you just simply buff the element damage of the party. And then the other, what we call a crush, where you apply a debuff on the boss to make them take more elemental damage. So the crush tends to be a little better, and that's why you see, Lacrima Lavanya here, who has a wind crush and a defense break. That's why he's number 1. Fractured Akeha with a fire crush. Fractured Demos with a wind crush. Fractured Argo with a water crush. And then Fio's over here with a dark crush. And actually, this Welfare New Year Gale has a dark crush. And then Abstract Fio has a water crush. And then even the Free Fox character has a water crush. Pretty cool. Lavanya's up a little further because he also has support passives to the party. Attack and HP. And then he has a light buff. And then Bloody Saryu has a water buff. New Year Rion with a light buff. A Bloodless F66X with a fire buff. All of these are 2-party, by the way. Abstract Marie with a wind buff. All right, so element buffers. So the ideal, third wave of subjugation, for example, you might have an element buffer and then Christmas Akeha and then your DPS, for example, and then something similar in wave 2. Great. So that's the element buffer category. elemental DPS. And we're going to have to add the brand new abstract Udeal, who's a wind attacker. And then all of the new abyssals, 063Y, Noel, Rion, as and Akeha as elemental attackers. Kind of abstract Yuri, not really. We can add Shadowbound Rion as a supporter. Attack buff and defense buff to the party with some dark specific buffing as well. Well, Frozen Heart, very similar to we don't, we can't max awaken him yet, but tanky with a very high base attack. Okay. And at the top of the list here, we have Bloody Lavanya, who can do absurd dark damage. He has a character skill with no hits, but it buffs himself, and then you'll see crazy damage from his skills. So top damage dealer in dark. And then the Abyssals, who also, I've said it before, I'll say it again, they all have that drawback of the extended cooldown time. So, if you're free to play or don't spend much, it's best to kind of skip those Abyssal banners. But some of them are pretty cool. Like I really like Fio, and of course all of them bring very top tier weapons as well. All right, that's elemental DPS. We'll talk briefly about healers. We have Bloody F66X, excuse me, with she has a regen heal and a cleanse. And then Summer Saryu, who's my favorite because she has a C gauge and it just goes off so often. And it's a 30% heal, huge heals, and she's so tanky, so valuable. And I'm only assuming that she's here because of the cleanse. So, if you didn't get Summer Saryu, she is limited. The EX Saryu is pretty good as well. It can maybe do a little more damage, and her weapon's very essential to grab anyway. Then also noteworthy are the other cleansers, because cleanse is very valuable, and you'll see that with this Akeha here and this Fio here. Okay, so as for the rest, like I said, I'll provide a link so you can kind of poke around the site and learn more. And then PVE tanks, usually you're not really thinking about that, but we have the utility of the provoke tanks here and the attack break and defense buff from Demos, and we'll talk about them more in PvP. Cool, so that wraps up the PvE tier list discussion. So head over to Rayon's PvP tier list, and this is a great document that not only has the tier list, but all of this great info on roles. And you can come back and read all of this about the different roles, and then all this different like team building layout, and what layout is good and what it's good against, etc., etc. So this is some great info to pour through, but we're just gonna briefly touch on the tier list up here. Okay. So down there, he does talk about these types: turrets, Agi Rusher, and balanced. And essentially, the way Rayon defines a turret is someone who has 2 attack passives and is built for max cooldown. So short cooldown weapons in the main, EX in the subs, and then full cooldown in the memoirs. And then an Agi Rusher being someone with an Agi passive, and a balanced being someone that has 1 of each. But for me, I just think of a turret as anyone built for max cooldown. And then in Agi Rusher, the best ones have a passive for timed agility. And, that'll include EX Gale, who's kind of fallen off because she's just not that strong. And then there's EX Fio, who has it. But in the spring, we got Fractured Noel, who is pretty strong, has the 40%. So it's easy to get her up to 100%. With either support or weapons or a combination of, other sub-weapons with timed agility. But she also has a pursuit passive, so when she's comboing, she's going to do nice damage, and she is one of the most popular units. Over here, we have some other ones that, he's basically saying you can build anyone as an Agi Rusher with the right build. So that means like timed agility in the sub-weapons and agility memoirs, etc., etc. And before we had her, before we had this Noelle, Celeb Gale was really popular, and not just because she's strong, but because of that bold vigor. If you're acting first, you're guaranteed to have full HP, and that bold vigor is going to create a huge multiplier. And sure enough, as long as you could chain with her, she was doing so much damage as a sniper, and you could take out that really problematic character on the other team. Okay, so a balanced would be a combo, and you can kind of build balanced as well. All right. Bloody Gale, kind of interesting because she has Agi and Pursuit. So again, you know, an Agi passive and a damage passive. Her base attack is kind of low, but she can definitely do some damage with those passives. Mechanical Assassin Akeha kind of fell off, but she's built so well, and I really hope we either get a buff for her or a new character like her. Hopefully you deal. We really need a fire sniper, someone that can use that fire subjugation greatsword. But she was built with timed agility, a reasonable amount for early game, and training, which helps, helps you do combos on your auto attacks, which is what you're doing when you're a rusher, when you're a sniper, right? Okay, so Abstract Lars is really good for that. He just got buffed, so he has high base agility. All the right passives. Then over here in the turret category, basically anyone I talked about that's a great damage dealer that can be built as a turret. And your goal is to get their skills off as fast as possible, and just, hopefully they take everyone out with those skills. Okay, support is just as important, and it's no mystery that the new Bloody Griff is the most valuable provoke tank. If built right, he can be so annoying to get around. Usually, you put a weapon with a recovery passive in his subs, and it gives him an extra chance to revive and then take advantage of his 100% heal, and it is very strong. So we've had a lot of opportunities for players that didn't originally get him to get him, and highly recommended. Then we just got Celeb Akeha, who can also use a character skill at the beginning of battle, and it applies a defense break on the enemy and an attack buff to the party. Just be careful when you use it because it will freeze your skill cooldowns. Make sure that your skills are just about ready before you hit that thing. And then Demos, of course, has that attack break to the enemy, defense buff to the party, usable at start, and he's often paired with a provoke tank and then 1 DPS. And yeah, and then, Nier 063Y is the old provoke tank who still does an okay job, but, in the current meta with subjugation weapons, it's really easy to take him down now, where Griff is standing up to that abuse way better with his damage reduction and that heal and all those annoying mechanics, right? Of course, Summer F66X, I mentioned her a moment ago, and she can hard block that provoke and allow you to take out the attacker first. She also gives an attack buff to the party. And in Arena, it's kind of nice because she'll block the enemy from getting that element buff from their subjugation weapon, which will reduce the incoming damage to your Griff, right? I still love using Christmas Fio because she's got an attack buff and agility buff to the party. Still very useful. And then the Lacrima Lavanya is great to just plop in where you used to have EX Lavanya, because instead of a 40% attack buff to self, it gives a 20% attack buff to the party. And then Griff has always been really popular because he has Valiance, so he can be your gun user and give an attack buff to the party with his passive. And I also mentioned Summer Gale before with that crit damage passive. Cool. All right. That basically covers PvP. And again, it's worth, kind of looking through here and reading all this about the roles and the team building options. All very useful info. And that is all I want to talk about in this video. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks again to everyone for 500 subs. Thank you for your continued support. It means the world to me. Let's keep going and get to 1,000. So if you're new here, please hit sub on the channel, throw a like on it, and leave a comment below to let me know what you thought of the video. Any thoughts that you want to add, I'm dying to hear it. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.